Alright, so today we are going to do a follow-up on my Changing the Survivors of Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc video. Well, not really a follow-up, but just the Danganronpa 2 version. Now I know for the Trigger Happy Havoc video, I actually didn't change the survivors because I thought those 6 survivors were the best possible survivors, but for Danganronpa 2, I would for sure change the survivors. So if you need a little refresher on the second game, these were the 5 survivors, and this wasn't a horrible surviving cast or anything, but right away I knew there was one dead person that I really wanted to add to this group of survivors. In fact, I would take this dead person over any of the other characters that survived, excluding Hajime, obviously because he's very plot relevant. But the other 4, if I had to, I would replace any of them with Hiyoko. Any single one of them. Now if you didn't know, Hiyoko was originally supposed to be one of the survivors. However, the writers decided to make Fuyuhiko survive instead of Hiyoko because they felt like Pekko's death would be a waste. Now I can see their point here. This is often how people feel about Kiyotaka as well in the first game. But let me give you a few reasons why I prefer Hiyoko over Fuyuhiko as a survivor. The first reason is how likable they were by the time they died. Now both of these characters were planned to be killed off at chapter 3. If Hiyoko survived, Fuyuhiko would have been a victim in chapter 3 along with Ibuki. And of course, the version we got was Fuyuhiko surviving and Hiyoko dying in chapter 3. Now if you look at both of the characters, who got a better redemption? Hiyoko made her little shrine to show respect for Mahiru, and she showed subtle signs of opening up to the group, such as coming to Ibuki's music concert. Then you have Fuyuhiko, who literally tries to protect Pekko in her own execution. Then he starts to recover, and then he stabs himself because he knows some people won't forgive him. Now I don't know about you, but to me, Fuyuhiko's redemption felt more complete. It felt kinda sudden as well. I mean, he becomes friends with everyone quite quickly, while with Hiyoko, it doesn't really feel like she's befriended many people yet. Even in chapter 3, Hiyoko still has her mean attitude around everyone, while Fuyuhiko's not really distancing himself from the group like he used to. This is probably just more evidence that Fuyuhiko was originally planned to die in chapter 3, because it seemed like he was a redeemed character, whereas Hiyoko still had more development to go through. In chapter 3, who's the killer? Mikan. Now when Mikan enters her despair state, she has some interesting dialogue about being the victim, everyone always blaming things on her, and things of that nature. She just has a victim mentality. But imagine if Hiyoko was there to see that Mikan. I think she would be the most impacted by Mikan's words, because she picked on Mikan the most. And yeah, I know it's suggested that Hiyoko bullies Mikan to make Mikan stronger, but Mikan's crazy state would let Hiyoko know that bullying isn't going to solve the problem. After all, Despair Mikan goes on about how bullying is what made her the person she is today. After this trial ends, I wouldn't be surprised to see Hiyoko crying, and I think we would have got to see her full character arc by the time we got to chapter 4. And speaking of chapter 4, the plot of chapter 4 would have changed if Hiyoko survived instead of Fuyuhiko. And this is because of Strawberry House and Grape House's dorms. If you remember in chapter 4, Fuyuhiko is actually the reason why the culprit of chapter 4 got caught. He was just chilling outside of the Strawberry House dorms, and once the alarm rang, both Kazuichi and Gundam also arrived because of the loud noise. But of course, Gundam wasn't supposed to be there because he was in a soundproof room, and that's how he gets caught as the culprit. Now the Strawberry House dorms were meant to be used by the guys, and the Grape House dorms were meant to be used by the girls. But because there were a lot more boys at the time, Strawberry House's dorms were filled, and Hajime had to go to the Grape House dorms. But if Hiyoko survived, Hajime would no longer be in the Grape House and would instead be in the Strawberry House because Fuyuhiko's now dead. So this changes the plot a lot because Hajime might take Fuyuhiko's place as the person who's just chilling outside of Strawberry House's dorms. Now if you remember what happens in the chapter 4 investigation, you explore Grape House as Hajime, but you also explore Strawberry House as Nagito. Now if we have Hajime at Strawberry House, who will we control to explore Grape House? That's right, we would have to be playing as someone else to explore Grape House. And if I had to guess who it would be, I think it would have to be Chiaki. I mean, I don't really see anyone else who we would play as. And as for Strawberry House, we would still be playing as Nagito because he needed to figure out that everyone else was ultimate despair for the plot to advance. So yeah, Hiyoko surviving would have possibly made chapter 4 a Nagito / Chiaki investigation, which I think a lot of people would really like. Now what about character interactions and character conflicts? If Hiyoko survived, would she have interesting character interactions with the other survivors? The short answer, yes. One character dynamic that would have been really interesting would be Hiyoko and Kazuichi. After Mikan, Kazuichi was Hiyoko's biggest target as a bully, so it would have been really interesting to see her help Kazuichi in a nicer way than bullying. Not only that, but Hiyoko is a character that spits some facts, so she would easily be able to take Fuyuhiko's place to call out Kazuichi simping over Sonia, or just calling out any stupid things the characters do, and I think that would be pretty funny. Hiyoko also could have reacted to her older self in Chapter 6. This could also probably set up a conflict between Kazuichi and Hiyoko, because Kazuichi would probably think that she's the mastermind or something like that. I don't know, to be honest, but there's a lot of possibilities for interesting dialogue from that one picture. Now we're finally done with Hiyoko, but what about the rest of the survivors? Do I like them? Well, let's start with Kazuichi. I think Kazuichi works well as a survivor because he does bring a lot of different conflicts to the table. This is mostly because of how scared he is. He constantly suspects people as the traitor, such as the phase where he thought Hajime was the traitor. Also, as I mentioned previously, seeing how Hiyoko would treat him differently just would have been a fun dynamic to see. And he has his relationship with Sonia, where he's just simping over her. My only problem with this is the way it's handled. Sonia gets pretty cold to Kazuichi during the Chapter 4 trial, and in Chapter 5, where the gang is searching for where Nagito might have hid the bombs, Kazuichi and Sonia have this exchange of dialogue, which makes it seem like they won't talk to each other anymore or something like that. But quite suddenly, they're just sort of normal again? Like, I don't know, Sonia just treats him nicely again, and it's very weird. It just seemed like they were going to develop a phase where Kazuichi and Sonia didn't talk to each other for a while, and then maybe fix that on later in the game. But nah, Kazuichi just kept simping, and I guess Sonia just got used to it by the end of the game, and she really didn't care. So right now, we have 3 survivors: Hajime, Hiyoko, and Kazuichi. This is where it gets really complicated, because the other 2 survivors are Sonia and Akane. Now these 2 aren't horrible, but honestly, they aren't that good either. The only standout interactions Sonia had for me are the ones with Kazuichi, and honestly, Akane doesn't really have any. She has funny moments here and there, such as Baby Gangster, and the whole front tail thing, but nothing going on for her in the long run. Yes, she has a relationship with Nekomaru, but I'm talking about interactions with the other survivors here, and the only one that I can really think of is the one with Fuyuhiko in Chapter 4, where Fuyuhiko basically tells her to never take Nekomaru's life for granted, because that was the mistake he made with Peko. So Akane has her moments with Nekomaru, and Sonia has the whole Gundam Kazuichi love triangle thing going on. With this knowledge, would I pick either of these characters as a survivor? Yes. And it's actually probably not the one you expected. I'd pick Akane instead of Sonia. And it all goes back to Hiyoko. Remember in Chapter 3 where Hiyoko calls out Akane for acting too impulsively? And then Nekomaru's friendship with Akane is what ultimately gets him shot. That's why Hiyoko says becoming friends with everyone is pointless and it isn't smart. Now what does Akane do for the rest of the game? She acts impulsively. Chapter 5, she literally almost kills Nagito. I honestly don't understand why she keeps acting impulsively even after Nekomaru dies. But if Hiyoko was there, Hiyoko would be the perfect person to have conflicts with Akane, because she already called Akane out on her rash actions. So we got 4 survivors. Now this is where it gets really hard, because this is when I came to the realization that one character is probably going to have to suffer. One character is just not going to get the development they deserve, kind of like Leon from the first game. Now, we just have Sonia and Fuyuhiko. Now I know I said I'd rather have Fuyuhiko dead than Hiyoko, but honestly, I really like Fuyuhiko as a survivor. He was a bro character to Hajime. When all the other characters were making sexual jokes, he'd often tell them to cut it out, which is funny, and I think the 2 short people yelling at the rest of the cast would just make for some good dialogue. Then we got Sonia. This is where I had some problems. Should I keep her as a survivor and make the game have 6 survivors? Or should I replace her as the Chapter 3 victim death? Now the problem with killing her off in Chapter 3 is her relationship with Gundam and Kazuichi is almost non-existent. But if the game had 6 survivors, each character would have less dialogue, and I think that would harm the survivors rather than help them. In the first game, 6 survivors were fine, because you focus on them for half of the game. But going into Chapter 5 for the second game, you would have 8 survivors. And then in chapter 5, you would have to share the dialogue between the 6 survivors in Danganronpa 2 and 4 characters from Danganronpa 1. So this is my risky move for Sonia. I would make her a chapter 4 victim. That's right, instead of making chapter 3 the double murder chapter, I would make the double murder chapter chapter 4. This gives Sonia enough time to flesh out her own character and her relationship with Gundam and Kazuichi in the daily life section of chapter 4. Then in chapter 4, Sonia dies, and I think it would go down like this. Let's just say Sonia just woke up early coincidentally, and she stumbled upon Gundam murdering Nekomaru. And then Gundam killed her impulsively because of his will to live. And this would make Kazuichi really angry at Gundam in the post-trial, but Gundam would probably deeply regret his actions anyway. And he might actually start crying in the post-trial. Now this could set up more than just conflict between Gundam and Kazuichi. It can also set up dialogue with Kazuichi and Akane. You see, a lot of people really don't like Akane because it just doesn't seem like she cares about Nekomaru as much as, say, Hiyoko cares about Peko. And that's because she gets over Nekomaru's death really fast. But the reason she gets over it fast is because she's really strong. She understands that she has to move on, and it's no use sulking over his death constantly. She can teach this exact lesson to Kazuichi when Sonia dies, because I'm pretty sure when Sonia dies, despair will hit Kazuichi like a truck, and it can be Akane's job to help him out. So there we go. That was a lot longer than I expected, to be honest, and all I really did was switch Hiyoko with Sonia. But I had to make a few changes to the plot in order to do so as well, and when you change even one survivor, lots and lots of things will change, so yeah. This is how I would change it. I think someone in my Danganronpa 1 survivor video actually commented the same thing, which was very surprising. Maybe not in the same way I would do it though, but yeah. Comment down how you guys would change the survivors. And now let's go over the dead people and why I would keep them dead. So let's go over this quickly. With the ultimate imposter, aka Byakuya, Fat Byakuya, I think that was the perfect first step because this guy set up so much mystery. Everyone's wondering, is this a prequel? Is this a sequel? No one's really sure. Everyone's confused. You kill him off, the mystery remains there. The air is just shrouded in mystery. It's a perfect first step. Everyone's mind is just thinking so many thoughts. Everyone's thinking up all these theories. It's a really good way to set up the killing game. Next we got Teru Teru. And I mean, I don't think a lot of people are complaining that he died really quickly. But I think they really did a good job of making his character sympathetic. I mean, his story, his backstory there, that hit in the heartstrings, man. That was a sad story that he had. So even though he didn't get that much, I think his character was complete within one chapter. I think they did a really good job of just making it short and sweet. And yeah, I really did end up liking his character just from that one chapter. Next, we got Mahiru. And to be fair, I can see the argument for having Mahiru as a survivor because she wasn't the most likable character from the main story. She was pretty annoying, to be honest, but she just doesn't get much in the main story. Like, we wanted more. Everyone wanted more from Mahiru, but she kind of had to just die for Hiyoko. Honestly though, you could change up the story a lot. You'd have to change it drastically, but you could change the story to fit Mahiru in as a survivor, to just get more out of her. And it'd probably be good to have a grounded character, a more grounded character that survived at the end. So I can see an argument there, but I'd keep her dead just for Hiyoko. She's kind of like Leon in the sense that one character just had to suffer. Next we got Peko. I don't think anyone would argue this one. I mean, her death was so sad. So yeah, I'd keep that in. You know, she died for Fuyuhiko. And I think that's a pretty common thing with the survivors for this game. At least from my version, how I listed it. Hajime, Fuyuhiko, Hiyoko, Kazuichi, and Akane. Someone died for all of them, which is just crazy. But yeah, that's how the survivors are going for this one. Next, Ibuki. Now, Ibuki's a weird one because she's sort of just there for the comedy. But I don't think it was necessarily a bad thing to kill her off so early. Because her character's just likable already. Right? Chapter 3, everyone likes her already. So killing her off doesn't really do any harm to the game. Yeah, she doesn't get much. But that's kind of the point. She's just there to just provide comedy. And I don't know, there's just something about her that's really likable. So yeah, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. I think some people might just want it there at the end just for the comedy. And I'd get that. I'd understand if you were one of those people. And honestly, if you replaced Ibuki with any of the other characters, that would just make those other characters who would have died in chapter 3 just not get their development that they needed. Next, Nikon. I mean, I think this was perfect. Chapter 3, even though I don't like the way they did it, the motive, the despair disease or whatever, I hated the motive, but the way they made Mikon snap, it was pretty good. It showed us a different angle to Mikon. I think it was perfect. I don't see any complaints with that. Again, Nekomaru had to sort of die for Akane. This is a common thing. Just, you know, a character dying for another character that survived. You see it all the time. So yeah, that was his sacrifice there. And then similarly, Gundam had a good motive. Honestly, I'm surprised more people weren't like Gundam in chapter 4. I mean, they were like starving. They were actually starving, but they didn't want to kill. It just shows how much the Danganronpa 2 cast really value their friends, I guess, because they really wouldn't sacrifice their friends for anything. So yeah, I guess that was cool to see, but I really like Gundam's message there at the end. So yeah, I think it was a good thing that he died there. Then we have Chiaki and Nagito. I mean, Nagito, that's self-explanatory. Dude, his plan was amazing. And I mean, he set up the big twist with the ultimate despair. So I don't think anyone's complaining about that. And then Chiaki, I'm going to be honest, I find Chiaki kind of boring. It's just, I don't know. She's just not for me. I find her really boring. I feel like they kind of wasted space with her. I'm not going to lie. I mean, a lot of people like her, but I don't know. It's just her personality just felt stale to me compared to a lot of the other characters. So even though she was there at the end, not my favorite. But yeah. For this game, I feel like every character who had their death had a purpose.